and welcome back to another episode of 56-Bit Cloud Cafe. I'm Atir Dalal, and today we have an exciting episode lined up as we delve into the interesting technicalities of RDS. Hello everyone. Hello Patrick.
Hello Atir.
Are you ready for our episode today?
Yes, definitely. Let's do it.
So let's start. From the user's perspective, performance is key for a smooth experience. What are the common performance challenges in RDS?
Right, so for users to have a smooth experience when it comes to databases, the key here is to plan ahead, to understand the options that RDS gives you, and to plan ahead on exactly which options you're going to use with your database. Now, to do that, you must also understand how databases in general work at a very high level. So, databases, there are two different distinct types. There is the traditional type, the relational type, and then there are the non-relational type. We also call these sometimes SQL and NoSQL databases. We're not talking about NoSQL here. Let's forget about that for now. We'll do that in other episodes. But here, the focus is on SQL databases or relational databases, hence the name RDS, Relational Database Service. So what is a relational database? A relational database is a place where to store data in a specific format, and the format of the data allows you to very quickly get information from different tables. Tables are a way of organizing that data in your database. And these tables, they can join together in a way which can quickly give you that information. The information that comes back is, you can be sure that it is accurate and it is the latest information. This is not always true, and with NoSQL it will be slightly different, but we'll talk about that later. So with relational databases, you have very accurate, fast joining of these tables, and your data is coming to you in a performant manner. So that's SQL databases. Now, why am I talking about this? Because once you know that your data needs to be very accurate, you will immediately understand a bottleneck that is caused by this system. Whenever SQL does its job, it needs to ensure that the latest write to the database, so whenever you're writing to the database, is the one that comes back to whoever is reading. So let's say you have two servers. One server is writing data X, the other server is reading data X, the same data. That same piece of data, you must ensure that the reads, they get the latest writes. There is no old data. That is an essential part of SQL. To do that, it means that you can only use a single server to do the writes. You cannot have multiple servers doing those writes to the database. And that is a huge bottleneck of SQL type databases, like what RDS ultimately manages. So here we're talking about MySQL databases, Postgres SQL databases, Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, MariaDB, etc. All of these have a limitation, a bottleneck inbuilt into the type of the database, which is that you can only have a single server which does those writes, which accept you to write data to them, a single server. Now, why am I saying this? I'm saying this because this directly leads to performance. When you have a single server, you are reducing your chances of increasing your scale, of increasing your performance when you receive a lot of traffic. So, if you have a lot of writes in your application, so you have an application that is constantly writing to the database, then your server needs to be at a certain size which can take those writes. If your application is read heavy more than it writes, then there are different ways of ensuring performance there. This leads us to the first part, which is planning. So the first thing you need to check to make sure that your performance is good is whether your application is write-heavy or read-heavy. After that, you can decide what engine to use. Are you using MySQL? Are you using Postgres? Are you using SQL Server, Oracle, etc.? It's up to you. They all can be very fast, depending on the scale, but if you go deep enough, you will find differences in performance. Then you must choose an instance type. So what type of instance do you want to have? Do you want to have an instance with a lot of memory? Do you want one with a lot of CPU? Do you want one with a balanced amount of CPU and memory? And finally, the amount of storage. The amount of storage needs to be how much you need to save your data, plus quite a lot more to save other things that the database requires. So all this planning and understanding the underlying concepts of how SQL databases work is what will really help you to choose the right options in RDS and ultimately have the best performance.
Talking about scalability, here we come, the most common question and trending topic today. How does RDS handle scalability? And what strategies can users employ to scale their database instances based on changing workloads?
Scalability is very important when it comes to databases because as soon as your database starts slowing down, what will happen is it will have a cascading effect on your whole application. So once your server starts writing or reading from the database, if the database replies back in a slow fashion, that application cannot do its job and will ultimately slow down, and the users will start noticing that slowdown. So the database performance is key to the overall application performance. And as we said before, planning is very important, choosing the right options, the right engine, the right storage, etc. But you will soon reach a point where if you scale high enough, you will reach a point where you cannot grow higher than that. So, as we said, we can only have a single server that takes writes in RDS, not in RDS, but rather in any SQL system. So once you scale up, you can increase the scale of that server. So from 4 gigs of RAM, you go to 32 gigs of RAM, and probably the highest level would be hundreds of gigs of RAM. But if you reach that limit and you need to go even higher, you will find those limits because it is a single server. So once you reach those limits, then it's about scaling even further, but you cannot scale by increasing memory and CPU. You need to scale by increasing the number of RDS servers. That can only be done by what is called striping. Striping means splitting your data on different servers and you get the data from a specific server wherever it is stored. The striping mechanism is something that RDS cannot do automatically, but there is software out there that can do this, and this is a more of an advanced feature. You will require this only if you have quite a lot of scale, because if you don't, then having a single server is enough as long as it has enough memory and CPU. But you will reach those limits, and when you do, then you need to start adding servers to take those writes, and thus you need striping. But what if your application is not write heavy? It doesn't write a lot, you don't need that much scale when it comes to writes, but rather it is read heavy. It requires a lot of reading. In that case, there are different ways of scaling. In that case, you can improve performance whenever you have a lot of traffic coming in, whenever your application needs to read a lot from the database. You can do that by very easily adding servers, adding what are called read replicas. These are extra servers, and each one can have a lot of memory and CPU, but ultimately you can just keep adding servers to read, and you will read from those servers. You cannot do writes to them, you can only do reads. So this can only work when your application is read heavy and you've reached limits in terms of reading. Another way to improve scaling is to add a cache. A caching engine like RDS or Memcached. There are managed services in AWS called Elasticache, which manage these RDS and Memcached caching engines. And caching is basically very, very fast storage and retrieval of data. So unlike RDS, the data is not stored on disks, but rather the data is stored inside RAM, inside memory. And RAM is 10 times, 20 times or more faster than disks. So these caching engines, they store their data in RAM, making them much, much faster. But most of the time, caching has its limitations. If your application is read heavy, caching can really improve performance. With writes, it is debatable. There are strategies. If it is write heavy, you can improve performance with caching, but there are limits to that as well. So it's all about realizing whether it is read heavy, write heavy, and whether you need more than one server or not. And if you do, there are strategies for writes to have more than one server. That's what we call striping. And there are strategies for reads which allow you to do which are read replicas basically, as well as caching. That's how you improve scalability on RDS.
Today, we talked about scalability and performance. Keeping that in mind, what monitoring and diagnostic tools does RDS provide?
That's a good question. Basically, it's an important question because we did speak about performance, we did speak about scalability, and both of those, you can never achieve them properly if you don't monitor and ultimately troubleshoot where performance issues lie. So monitoring is an essential part of everything we do in AWS and everything we do with RDS, with our databases. So what monitoring and diagnostic tools can we use? First of all, out of the box, you get what's called basic monitoring, which are a list of metrics, things like CPU, memory, usage, storage capacity, things which are basics and you need them. And it's good that you have them. You'll have them by default. You can see these in the RDS console. When you have your database, you just go in it and you have a monitoring tab where you can go and see these, and you can even see them in CloudWatch. These are actually saved in CloudWatch and you can go there and see them. You can then switch on for a small price increase. You can switch on enhanced monitoring. Enhanced monitoring is available for all database engine types in RDS. And this gives you a much richer list of metrics and logs that you can view. And ultimately, then you can monitor, you can get patterns, you can realize where issues lie in terms of performance and scalability, and fix accordingly. There is an even higher level of granularity and an even higher level of what you can get from these metrics, and that is called performance insights. Performance insights is the highest level you can get. You'll get a lot of metrics, a lot of logs. It goes very deep inside not just the infrastructure of the database, but even inside your tables, inside the SQL that is running in those database engines. You'll get things like which query that you're doing, which SQL commands that you're doing are the slowest or that are slowing down your database. Things like this. You can get very, very deep logging and insights, hence the name Performance Insights. So it's up to you how far you want to go. You start with basic monitoring. You can increase that to enhanced monitoring. You can increase that with Performance Insights. Ultimately, all this is saved in CloudWatch, and you can view most of these things in RDS console, but you can also then go and view them in CloudWatch logs, CloudWatch metrics, dashboards. CloudWatch is a very, very powerful service which integrates well with RDS. We'll hopefully have some episodes on CloudWatch later. One final thing, apart from viewing and realizing where the problems lie, you might also want to automate that process so you don't have to manually go in and check these patterns yourself. So you can set thresholds where you say if CPU reaches this level, I get notified. I get an alert which sends me an email, which calls me on my mobile, which triggers some kind of process to increase the number of servers. So you can have alerts, notifications, and automation built into that monitoring system. If you do this monitoring manually, but even better in an automated fashion, you will definitely start seeing patterns and realize that there are other options you can use in RDS to improve that performance and scalability.
Hope this episode gave you a better view about performance and scalability, and at the same time about the monitoring tools for RDS. Stay tuned for our final episode about RDS. Until then, happy cloud computing. To stay connected and never miss a beat, be sure to follow our podcast channel for the latest episodes. Also, you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn to know more about all the updates in Cloudfield and to know more about our upcoming webinars and events.